Hello, divers, and welcome to a little bit of a different both class on Patreon and podcast. Am I doing for the first time a combination of class or virtual practice, better said, for my community of the Dive Into Reiki Patreon, as well as a podcast episode. So every month on my community podcast, I do a Reiki Q&A where I answer questions. And this year, I wanted to actually do an end of year recap of lessons I've learned. I've heard different podcasters do that on their respective fields, especially a self-publishing lady that I really love called The Creative Pen. And every year she does a recap of what she learned in 2021, 22, 23. And I felt it was very interesting, especially this year when it's a year that I felt has been very beautiful, but very difficult. Perhaps the best word to describe is very rich. I think most of us after the pandemic, we felt we're out of the woods. And given a lot of the world wars that are happening around and a lot of inflation, but also beautiful things happening, some of us, there is love around as well and good news. It's been perhaps for all of us, a lot of movement and changes. So it's been quite an interesting year, and a lot of it has impacted the practice in a very meaningful way, and also all the interviews of the Dive Into Reiki podcast. So this is going to be the Reiki Q&A or the year in recount for the Patreon community, and also the last episode for the year 2023 of the Dive Into Reiki podcast. And we will start actually the year 2024 of the Dive Into Reiki with a little bit of a new element in the podcast. I will start bringing in a few people who are not Reiki practitioners, but there will be people who do Japanese traditions. We're going to start with someone who is a 5th-degree martial artist in Iaido, the art of throwing the sword. And they will give us insights in Japanese practices, either martial arts or calligraphy, that may help us deepen our Reiki practice. So it's really about combining and understanding a little bit more of the culture and those practices about Reiki. So hopefully we'll get a little bit more of that. And that's going to be the element. And I have another, sorry, my dog is here. So you may hear a little bit of excitement behind me. So that's going to be the 2024. There is another couple of interviews already lined up. I'm very excited. But I think from now on, the last episode of the year will always be a little bit of a recount of the year, of some lessons I've learned, as well as perhaps a goal for the new year. And I also invite you, if you have the time, to perhaps take a time to reflect. Where was your practice at the beginning of 2023? Where are you now? And without judgment, really just checking in where you are honestly, with a lot of compassion, are you feeling more compassionate? Did you practice? And if you didn't, that's okay. Perhaps setting your goal to carve a little bit more of time, what is standing in the way, but really bring compassion, not judgment. So I hope you enjoyed that. And again, our practice is part of our lives. And perhaps you're practicing more than you know. I had a student telling me that she didn't practice the homework I gave her, yet she was going to have a fight with her family during the holidays, and she stopped herself, went out and practiced Joshin Kokioho, purifying breath that she had just learned. And that for me, I was telling her, what do you mean you don't practice? So also just check a little bit, what do we call practice? How has practice become part of your life? So really take a little bit of an inventory and see where perhaps you can squeeze in a little bit more of a practical thing in your life. And also see if perhaps, you want to put a little bit more life and set a plan to do it, a practical plan. Like perhaps I will play 5 minutes less of a game, which I committed to do, and it's hard for me to do on this freaking phone, and dedicate that to meditation. So doing something very tiny, practical, and again, magic happens just adding a couple of minutes, well, perhaps 5 to 10 minutes a day, right? So if you want any tips, advice, as usual, always feel free to reach out to me, either on the Patreon platform or via Instagram or my email. I go on most sites, social media, as Dive Into Reiki. And my name, a full name, in case some of you don't know, is actually Nathalie Jaspar. I realize a lot of people, they write as Nathalie and sometimes even as Dive. as I barely ever use my last name. So that is Jaspar. And I also, again, if you're just listening to the podcast, and I invite you to check the Patreon. It's a very affordable opportunity to have a little bit of continuity, to have a little bit of a reminder to practice every week, and to get a lot of information, to have a lot of access to over 2 years of backup practices, and just also have a community where exchanging messages there. And sometimes it's hard with time and life, we stop practicing. So having that on Monday evenings or in replays may be something interesting for you. And if you love the podcast, there is also an option to support it for very little money. It does help a lot to pay for editing, for hosting. I pay for most of it by myself or with my Reiki Patreon community for the classes. So any support is welcome. It also helps me expand perhaps the kind of opportunity I may bring in the future. And with that long intro, I would love to share some of my lessons from 2023. So I think the first thing that I would love to share is the power of practicing every day. And a lot of times this just is an empty generic statement, right? But I think this year I really felt it myself in my body. I had kind of a complicated health situation in February, which I didn't share on social media or anything. My patron knew it. I took a break for like 10 days where I had a kind of like not dangerous, but like serious surgery. And when I came home, it's the first time I ever had surgery. I was like in pain. They gave me very, very little painkillers right now in the US because of the opioid situation. We don't get a lot like beyond Advil, to be honest. And it was really painful. And that night, I offered myself Reiki, but again, we're talking about daily practice. And what really was incredible is the following day, how the level of pains really were very manageable. But also, mostly it was the calm and patience I was able to go over the situations for the next 2 weeks. We don't get a lot of sick days in the US, which meant a week after I was already working from my bed with very little energy. And I was able to really pace myself, observing all kind of my bad mood and, all this. You're tired, you're cranky, you're a little bit not in the best place. And be able to just be very compassionate to that and navigate through that because I had a solid base. And also the surgery had some consequences in terms of hormonal balance and all of that. And honestly, I'm sorry, I'm very foul-mouthed. I try to be polite in the podcast, but I was like sometimes like really crazy shit happened with my brain balance. And I was able to observe it from a position, again, from like almost like a certain distance. It resolved after a couple of months, thank God. I don't think I could have stayed in that place much longer, but having a daily practice allowed me to have that distance and some calm that after 2-3 months started to like wash away a little bit. It's like, okay, I need some help now. But I was able to navigate that in a way that was a little bit easier. And I don't think without having done years of daily practice, I could have gone through that. In some of my interviews this year, that also came true. Specifically, the interview I did with René Vodkley. He's a Swiss-German person. He lives between Greece and Switzerland. And he had a brain hemorrhage this year, when he was actually a couple of weeks before I interviewed him. And he was swimming in a lake, and then he had the brain hemorrhage, a huge headache. And he actually was able to go to the hospital in intensive care for 3 days. And after 10 days, he was interviewing me he didn't have any consequences. I saw him a couple of months after in the Portugal, in the conference we all did about history of Reiki in Lisbon. And he was in perfect shape. And he does attribute that amazing recovery and also that calm that he had when he was swimming and had the brain hemorrhage to his daily practice. These are very extreme cases, but they are like simple things, like when I go on the street and sometimes people scream at me, and sometimes I lose it. Most of the time, I can keep my cool and at least not respond. In the best of the cases, respond compassionately. And that comes from daily practice. I think the more we see the news, the more we see people taking one side blindly and fighting with other people that at the end are not even like core part of conflicts, right? We're here in New York or we're in Miami, and we're taking this extreme and adding to the fuel versus also taking a place of compassion and light. So daily practice helps, right? If you drive and you're stuck in the traffic from LA, the famous 405 or 425, I don't know the number, for 2 hours, how do we take our daily practice so that we're not like desperate there and honking? So daily practice does have an effect. And the other thing I notice is after many years, it accumulates. It's like even if you do a little every day, the more you do it over the years, the more effective. Sorry, I gotta pause this until my dog stops. I apologize. That is my dog. Every time Amazon rings, and of course, they don't ring only when the podcast starts. So, years of practice. So that was something very important. So that will be lesson one. Again, it sounds like we say this every day, but this year I really, really felt it and invite you again, 5 minutes every day, better than 1 hour every week. I think another thing I really noticed this year, the importance of the body as an equal partner. Often in Reiki practice, we heal the body, we fix the body, we relieve the pain in the body, we relieve the stress of the body. But the body actually has a lot of wisdom. Right now, actually, they're finding more and more about this, and they're calling it somatic intelligence. So when we do hands-on healing, and I think sometimes that name trips us up, it should be almost like hands-on listening, hands-on examining. Please listen to your body. Listen to all those insights, to all those memories, to all the trauma, to all the beauty that is hidden there, to all the light, all that beautiful energy of your body, right? And I think in that sense, Japanese are a lot more comfortable than Westerners are in the body. I think that was a theme that I had for my presentation in Portugal from martial arts. And if you're a patron, you have that class that I did. I presented that presentation as well. So if you haven't seen it, I will invite you to watch it. I think it's either in April or May. And if not, I will actually be placing next year that class as a pay-per-view on the Patreon, which is another news. But the body is an equal partner. There is no body, there is no feeling key, there is no body, there is no enlightenment. So it's not the big mind taking care of the body and fixing the body or letting go of the body so we can become enlightenment. In this plane, your body is an equal partner and it has a lot of insights. It has a lot of energy that we need to really reach that level. And in martial arts, again, we achieve unity when we achieve unity of the body and the mind. That is when magic happens. In Reiki, it is in the Reiki kanji, right? Heaven and earth, mind and body coming together so that the heart opens. Earth and heaven coming together. So really starting to treat our body as more of an equal partner instead of something to be healed and relieve of stress or pain or to be escaped to so we can go to a higher plane. Really, our getaway to the universe in Japanese tradition is actually your lower belly. I'm practicing now with a Buddhist monk from a different tradition that I'm used to. And he keeps repairing how we have to become, I'm going to say humans. He keeps saying man, but again, his English is very basic. People of Hara, people of the lower belly, right? But it also means people who remember they're one with the universe. But it means people who have the energy in the lower belly, so they're peaceful and calm. He says when we have the energy in the head, we're all crazy and go to war. So people of Hara. And that again means also people who are very much grounded in their body. We become more peaceful, more harmonious. So we don't flee the body. That's what makes us unstable and a little crazy. We actually find when we're grounded in the body is when we find harmony, which is a little bit very opposite of what we get a lot from our Western spiritual culture. So that for me this year was very, very important. I think the practice with this Buddhist monk has been very, very interesting because when I practice his style of meditation, Seisa, and I don't master it enough to be able to share it with the people on Patreon yet. Hopefully in a year or two, I may. But I can feel the energy really pushing down in a beautiful way that feels like a mountain. And it just brings your mind and your heart down in a beautiful way. Your brain becomes very clear, very peaceful. So really, I'm feeling this year a lot more hope being in that in that body, in that lower part of your body, has been quite instrumental in keeping my calm through some crazy up and downs in terms of like everything, work, life, war news, everything. So please stay in your body, be grounded in your body. I've had some friends doing a lot of ayahuasca, a lot of crazy stuff. And I've been telling them, be in your body. There is not a lot of listening. And I've also been talking to them a lot. The last part of the year, a lot of breakdowns. People really like being now in a very dark place because, again, when you do these very extreme experiences, you also do need to do not your regular grounding. You need to come back to the body in a very strong way. So if you're doing especially these kind of experiences, please pace yourself and try to come back to your body as much as possible. We can actually go to the same places, still be grounded in your body. So that is another lesson. I think I've seen the two extremes this year, right? I've seen my martial artist and my Buddhist monk go through amazing places through the body. And I've seen the opposite, people really going through psychedelics and discovering beautiful insights, but also becoming very, very unstable and ended up in very dark places. So please get guidance and try to be very grounded when you experience these things. Another very interesting learning this year has been about history. I interviewed quite a few historians. Last year, it was Justin Stein, and I still love that learning about Reiki as translation as wonderful energy. This year was a little bit more novella-like, like those Latin novellas with a lot of drama. I interviewed Robert Fuston. I also talked to a few more historians this year. And I remember also last year, I talked to Johannes Reindel, who got the succession from Phyllis Leigh Furumoto. And this is mostly based on the main lineage from the Reiki Alliance, from Mrs. Takata to Johannes Reindel, and also last year's interview with Women in Reiki, my experience this year in the Portuguese Association History of Reiki conference, where there was also this talk about Mrs. Takata, Renee Votley also offering some interviews with her granddaughter, Phyllis Leigh Furumoto. And I know I'm mentioning a lot of names, but what came to me is once Usui passed away, we are left with a lot of very young masters. And ironically, in a way, Usui was a young Reiki master, but he had many, many years of practice, right? He had 20, 30, I don't know. We're thinking like probably he started in a Buddhist family. He started martial arts in his 10s. So you're talking about a person who, even though he died in his 60s, had probably over 40 years of deep spiritual and martial arts practices, right? So even though he may have been, he simplified this system, he really had a deep practice, spiritual practice. And then Hayashi was actually a doctor with less. So you're already talking that he was a younger Reiki master. And then when he passed it to Mrs. Takata, she was a very, very young master when she was left by herself after World War II. And then she obviously grew into her master abilities. But when she passed and she left it, like she was like going to leave it with one master, then it seems she has some problem. She grabbed her granddaughter, and when she passed, her granddaughter was barely trained as a Reiki master, right? And there was this huge issue about succession, who was the right successor. But there were those 20-something masters that were left at Takata's passing, barely had 3 years, 4 years tops. Some of them had 1 year experience as Reiki masters. And some of them barely had 4 or 5 years as Reiki practitioners. And I know that seems a lot. And when we start with our Reiki practice, it seems a lot. I'm going on probably I got my first initiation. It's going to be 17 years ago. And I still feel myself now as a young practitioner. So the more we advance, the more we realize 4 or 5 years into it, we're young. I think martial arts in that sense, they're a lot more aware. They call you a beginner for 10 years. And it's also the good news. It means it's a really interesting practice and we can get deeper. But I never had this idea that there would be so many fights and succession wars. And then with Mrs. Takata, who, is almost like the mother of most lineages that we all descend on especially in Western Reiki. After she passed, the masters will actually sabotage each other's classes and go to other classes and heckle and do kind of crazy things and create new systems. And a lot of it sometimes was for lack of understanding. So I found that, and again, I invite you to see episodes of the podcast, perhaps especially the Robert Houston that I posted a month or so ago, but also be more compassionate when people come to you with a lineage that you may not agree. At the end, what I also discover is we all reach the same place if we practice with the right state of mind of compassion. If we practice because we want to become better people and we want to help every being to be in a space of love and compassion, we're going to reach the same place. And I think even this master who was all like feisty and fighting with each other, they probably with practice, probably like that whole thing went out and they stopped fighting. But if you suddenly see yourself like in the middle of Reiki fights about lineages or concepts, just remember, practice. This is not about who's right or wrong. What is right is practicing daily and following the Reiki precepts. Some people may need 200 symbols. Some people may need the basic symbols. Some people may need more hands-on healing. Some people may need more meditation techniques. We all are different. The one thing that matters is that we follow the Reiki precepts and we don't get caught in anger, we don't get caught in fear and worry, and that we become more grateful and compassionate. But it's also quite interesting to hear about these stories and realize that Reiki history is not as peaceful as we believe it was, and also understand that those people were very young masters. So if you're a young master as well, understand that you are a young master, your practice will change. And that takes me a little bit to the next learning I got is your practice changes. And this is a beautiful thing. Like sometimes I see people and, they're in a place and I'm like, woo, they are there. And then I see them after a year and they have bloomed. And then I see them after a year and they're in the same place. And then I see them after a couple of years and they're in a totally different place. So please do not get attached to where your practice is today. If you're in a great place, especially if you have been a Reiki master and you're really doing good in your practice, please do not get attached to that. It can change. Sometimes it feels like it's changing for the worst. That is not true. You're probably going deeper. You're going through a dark night of the soul that will take you to a different stage. So please do not ever get attached to your practice. If you're going through a rough patch, it will change. If you're going through a boring patch, it will change. If you're going through a good patch, it will change. And don't judge people for what they're going through their practice, because if they're practicing, they are changing. If the only thing probably that you should be concerned, if you see people year after year and their practice never changes, then that means they may not be practicing or they're too attached to the practice. And that also is not for us to judge. That is the right thing for them at the moment, right? So people will change, your practice will change. Do not get attached of what your practice is, of where you are, and about where people are in their own practices. Do not judge that and do not get attached to the judgment of other people's practices. And that takes me to another learning. And this is for me a beautiful learning. I really been practicing with my mentor for many years. And I've added other mentors in different modalities that have helped me deepen my understanding. So I have my martial arts sensei, for whom I'm super grateful because she's bare with me. I have no talent, and she's helped me deepen the understanding, especially of the body part and Japanese practices and all of that. And she's a wonderful human being. Especially, she's helped me understand constructive criticism and no judgment, right? And trying different things to see what works. I've also practicing now. I practiced in the past with Zen monks, and now with this new Buddhist monk that is Shin Buddhism, that is also giving me a different insight into Buddhism. But I'm also practicing with my same teacher for a number of years. And one thing I discover is when my mentor deepens his practice, I also deepen my practice. So my mentor recently went to Japan to deepen his practice, and I can see direct consequences in my practice. Part of it is his teaching, but part of it is sometimes just sitting together or feeling that energetic connection. So I hope also by deepening my practice, I can help my students deepen my practice. And I think also as my students, some of them are teachers, they can also help people deepen their practice or give deeper experience to their clients and whoever they're sharing the space or the people they actually live with. So it's a beautiful cycle. But if you're a teacher, please practice, please read. Even listen, it doesn't even have to be Japanese. Like just by practicing, by walking on a forest, by paying attention and reflecting our practice, we deepen our knowledge. But there is also the engagement when we become Reiki teachers. We have a little bit of a commitment to deepen our practice, not just because of us, but because of every human being or every being in the universe, which sounds very Buddhist, but because of our students that we share practice with. So I'm very grateful to have a teacher that is very committed to deepen his practice. As a teacher, it also made me realize the importance of always, even though I've been doing it almost because I'm, not noticing, perhaps not aware, but now it's a commitment I want to do. I've been doing it because I'm very curious through the podcast and talking to people. Now it's a commitment I want to do even more consciously. To keep feeding, I've been reading a lot of books, and ironically, not to learn from the books, but to make sense of what I experience as I practice, which is also a difference. Before I used to read books to see if I understood the practice. Now I practice, and then sometimes the book makes sense of it. I also read a lot of Reiki books to know what people are reading and thinking more than to learn my practice. Honestly, the way I deepen my practice the most is by practicing and practicing other modalities. But yes, if you're studying with a teacher, just check that they're also doing, ask them. You can even ask them, like, what do you do to deepen your practice? I think it's an interesting question. I never even thought about asking my teacher. My teacher has always been very active into deepening his practice. I've also been very active myself because learning is what brings joy to my life, to be honest, learning about everything. So also ask yourself, how do I grow my practice as an individual? Even if you're not a teacher, how do I, beyond practicing every day, is there something that sparks my joy into my practice, right? How do I keep my practice alive and interesting? So those are interesting things to ask yourself, and that this year I want to do more consciously in 2024. I think another thing that has been very clear to me this year, and is a weird way because I don't know how to communicate it into words in a way that doesn't sound. It feels very clear to me energetically. And I think for most of my life, I feel responsible to make the people around me to feel good. It comes because perhaps I was born as the pacifier in my family. I was born in a family that was very anxious, where there was a lot of passive aggressiveness. It wasn't, there was not aggression, violence, or anything, but there was a lot of tension. So I was kind of always the pleaser and like the breaking the tension and the funny one. And in my profession, I was a journalist, so I always discover ways to make people feel at ease. So I think that is probably always was my role. And I also always felt this responsibility, like almost like if I'm going to share my light for world peace, almost like I want to bring peace and ease to the world. And lately, as I've been practicing, it's more clear that I can share my light with the world, but it's not my responsibility. My only responsibility is actually to stand in my light and to do my work. And whatever ripple off from that for the world is good. Also, a lot more clarity that, I am connected to everything. So the more I really keep my shit together, the more it helps everything. But and it's different wanting and wishing the world well than feeling responsible. I think that is a little bit where the difference comes. And I think I'm going to put like a very practical example. I'm going to fly. This is recorded because I'm flying to a shoot. And there is a lot of tension. We're working in a partnership with a bunch of different agencies and different groups of people to accomplish this shoot. And it's a shoot with real stories. A little bit like the podcast, but with video and a lot more money involved and a lot more people involved. And I'm like, oh, my first thing is like, okay, I'll go and I have to actually sit next to the director to just help with the questions. And I know the people talking, so make them feel at ease and like be also aware of what they're saying to make sure we cover all the material we have in these video interviews. And my first response was like, okay, I'll do joshing to make sure everybody feels at ease and relaxed environment. And then for the first time, I had the clarity, like, that's not my responsibility to hold the space for everyone during the production. I just need to make sure I remain centered in my light. That is my responsibility. That I wish everybody well, of course, that I may be compassionate towards everyone, yes, but I don't have to shoulder that responsibility. So there is a slight difference there. For example, I do wish for peace in the world, but it's not, I don't carry that heaviness in my shoulders. And it's a different thing. Well, when I'm in the right space, sometimes I do carry it. So it's a slight thing, and I hope it comes through clearly. I do sit in my light, I meditate, but what I feel responsible for is doing my inner work. That I feel responsible, like making sure there is no anger, no worry, that my crap doesn't spill on anyone. And by doing that, I feel it's almost like the sun, then that light projects wherever I go. But if you're in a bad mood, it's not my responsibility to make you feel better. So I think that is what I'm talking a little bit, but it's my responsibility that if you're angry and screaming at me, I don't react to you in an angry way, and I keep my center and I react from a compassionate way. That is my responsibility. And in most cases that not, that person then may actually change and shift. But that, if you don't, that's not my fault. That is you. So that is something that perhaps before I knew intellectually, as I practice this year, I really feel it at all levels integrating, and it's been quite interesting. And I think the example of the shoot is a beautiful way. Before I would be more active, like doing a lot of joshing. Now I just feel like just keep yourself in the right state of mind, the rest will flow. And it's not, I don't carry it in my shoulders anymore. So in a way, the precepts do not worry, right? I may wish gratitude, compassion, and love, unconditional love, but I do not worry about will it help people or not, right? So hopefully the words will be this clear. These are things sometimes I feel very clearly. I'm trying to do as well as I can with words. Please feel free to, if anything triggers you, please always reach out to me. Sometimes words can convey, or sometimes I may trigger you because of something I said that may trigger something new. Please never take this the wrong way. Always reach out to me. I'm sure we can clarify things. Something, and this is something that I learned. I already knew this, but I didn't know it was literally in the Reiki kanji. So I had an interview with a practitioner called Foke Brink this year about calligraphy and the characters for Reiki, the traditional Japanese characters calligraphy for Reiki. And in the part of the top part of the ray, there are clouds. So there is heaven, there is clouds, and then rain. And I love that because I think, many times as when we start Reiki, we feel if I practice, nothing will happen. And then when shit happens, we think my practice is not working. But basically, and I invite you to watch the interview with Foke Brink, basically those clouds are part of your Reiki practice. They actually feed in your practice that you grow. So we're going to have those clouds, but those clouds are going to create that beautiful spiritual rain that is going to feed your practice so you can grow spiritually. So a lot of times we want to, skip the bad parts and just go into that place of love and light. That's never going to happen. I always think of Thich Nhat Hanh, right? And all these Buddhists are really, especially the modern ones that talk a little bit more our language and they walk into our world. He went through the Vietnam War and a lot of very painful things, but he always remained in a place of equanimity. He, even though, we were bombing from the US, a lot of his stuff, he never hated Americans, even though he was like actually not allowed to go back to Vietnam. He never hated the Vietnamese government. He always kept this place of inner peace and equanimity. So for me, really, even though he went through a lot of clouds, he was always able to retain that space and to actually use all that suffering as a way to grow that fire of his practice. So yes, clouds will be part of your Reiki practice. They're actually an integral part of your Reiki practice, so they can bring that spiritual like almost like rain that is going to feed that part of the earth, that rice, right? The rice grows with that water so that it can grow. I don't know if you've seen rice fields, but they literally flood them so that the rice can field. And the key part is actually that rice character that then goes into steam. So that rain will flood the rice so they can grow. So it's visually there. So when you have tough things going through your life, it's not that you're practicing bad, they're put there as an integral part of your practice. And this is, again, the importance of taking everything that happens into our life into our daily practice. We don't just do hands-on healing. We use it to reflect on what's happening. I had a fight with my neighbor at work today. How am I feeling it in my body? Can I use my hands to allow those feelings to move through my body instead of avoiding them, right? Instead of using hands-on healing to stay away from my work day, can I process my work day using hands-on healing? So I think that is a little bit of a different approach sometimes that we do, but it's there in the Reiki Kanji. So I invite you to really, really use the precepts to process your work life. And sorry, my dog is still doing a little bit of noise because he's getting bored today. And he's probably my podcast guest in a way, since today I don't have an official guest. And he's now sniffing, but he hasn't barked yet. So Maximilian is his name. And he's the unofficial Dive Into Reiki podcast guest today. He's a very elevated Reiki practitioner. He actually loves Reiki. So he's a perfect guest. And he's been a Patreon virtual practice assistant many times, as some of you who have been on the Patreon for a long time now. So going back to that, please integrate what you do. Don't use your Reiki practice to escape life. Don't use your hands-on healing just to relax away from your work life or from the problems in your love life or with relationships. Just feel that pain, feel those triggers, and use that hands-on healing. Like, where are you feeling it? In your feet and your shoulders. And then use your hands and allow those emotions, that tension, to melt away, to move through your body. And just, explore what you can do. Use the Reiki precepts. I'm angry with my dog because he just sniffed. Why am I angry? Why does my dog getting sniffed trigger my anger? What is not allowing me to do? So really use those precepts to explore what hides beneath those feelings in your daily life. And you will see a lot of growth coming on that. And you will see these, actually, those clouds are at the core. Working with our feelings is at the core of the Reiki precepts. My mentor always says the hands are never mentioned in the Reiki precepts or in any of the basics of the Reiki precepts, but they are obviously one of the pillars of the practice, but they are not in the Reiki precepts. How to handle our emotions and to process them are the core of the Reiki precepts. So please practice with your emotions, analyze them, examine them, let them go, bring them back, feel them in your body. Practice that every day if you can. And then the last couple, I think the last thing I'm going to say, and this is mostly if you're a teacher, and perhaps take it the other way, and Maximilian is on the way of barking. So I'm looking at him and saying, shh, lovely. I think he's really wanting to talk to you all as the guest today. And when I had that interview with Robert Fuston, he says something, keep Reiki 1 stories. So when you're teaching Reiki 1, keep what you're teaching adequate for that level, adequate. Reiki 2, adequate for the level, and Reiki 3, adequate for the level. And I agree that I think sometimes we're starting as Reiki teacher, like, oh, that happened to me, Reiki 3, and you get these Reiki 1 people very excited. They may not reach that level there yet. So try to keep a little bit what you teach in Reiki 1, or at least your anecdotes and your stories adequate a little bit to the level. But I will also point out something else. Do teach where they're supposed to go. If we only teach what is like Reiki 1, oh, this is hands-on healing, and you're going to relax, and you're going to do this and place your hands here, then we're also giving a very limited version of what Reiki is in the long term. So I would perhaps twist that a little bit and say, point your students toward the long-term vision of Reiki is, right? We're practicing Reiki is to uncover that bright light, to hopefully one day really become fully compassionate human beings, right? And it's in the Reiki precepts, so it is a teaching in Reiki 1, right? The goal of Reiki is to let go of all anger. One point, again, the ideal goal, right? We may not reach it there, is to let go of all anger, worry, so we can be fully grateful and compassionate human beings, right? And that probably is enlightenment, but I think if we keep it in easy words that every human can understand, it's a lot easier. Sometimes we use words like true essence and your real self and all of that. But I think now, like, literally they're becoming like Instagram posts. So they're losing their meaning because they're becoming, everybody's using them. So I think using the Reiki precepts as the ultimate goal perhaps is a little easier and more concrete to grasp. But that is the ultimate goal of Reiki. It's not just hands-on healing. And then we can teach those Reiki 1 stories. And then Reiki 2 a little bit more. And then Reiki 3, we can really go into those mysteries teaching, right? That are a little bit more. But the ultimate goal of Reiki should be pointed at since Reiki 1. Because if not, I've seen a lot of people who are like, oh, I like hands-on healing, makes me feel more relaxed. And that's it. And they may not know there is something more that could be attained. And a lot of people will stick to the Reiki 1 because that's what they need. And that is also okay. But if we don't let everyone know there may be something more to the practice, they may not try to push the boundary a little further. And I think we should everyone know, like, this is a gentle practice and this is how you do it. And this is good for every human being. And then in case you're interested, there is more to it and you can go all the way forward without adding a lot of crazy crap. Like, and then you can go to alternate state of consciousness or weird wording, but you can take this practice deeper and deeper and deeper. It's a lifelong practice that ultimately can take you to a state of mind of absolute compassion, right? And I think also we can explain what compassion means. So keeping it very, very simple, we can point out that there is more to it than just simple relaxation and state of well-being and balance, right? Because I think sometimes we're selling our practice short. So I think there are 2 kinds of sometimes practitioner. There are the people who sell the experience very high and they sell us like we're going to see unicorns and colors and all these very superficial sensations. They oversell them, but then when it comes to the practice, they says, and it helps you balance your energy and all levels, emotional, mental, physical. And then there are the people that sometimes we short sell the sensations. It's like, oh, you will have a well-being, peace, but it can take you all the way to enlightenment. So I think we need to balance that out. I think we need to keep the sensation at a decent level. You're going to feel warm, tingling. Some people may have extreme sensations, some people may not. And, it's a very easy to do, but ultimately it can take you to a state of mind of absolute compassion and interconnection. So I think we need to strike that balance and we need to stop overselling the immediate sensation. But we need to also point out to the ultimate for those people who are interested in perhaps pushing it beyond just a nice practice that can help you achieve balance at all states in everyday life. So these are some of my learnings for 2023. I have no idea what 2024 will bring to me. I think some of my goals are obviously to keep with the Patreon. I think some of it will be to bring many of the practices we did in 2023, but with fresh angles. I think every time we practice them, like this year we did Nentatsuho with a completely different state of mind than we did in 2022. And that was really interesting. And in part of it came from some of the questions I've had and some in the interviews I've had from you. So we're going to bring some of the practices back. I'm also very excited about some of the interviews I'm bringing to the podcast that, for example, I may not have dared to go before. I'm going to probably bring someone that actually created a completely different Reiki and added symbols. I probably in principle don't agree with that person. So part of the interview, and I openly told this person, I'm in a completely different place than you are, is asking her why is driving this person who actually has a deep spiritual practice with a mentor in India. So she comes from more of the India side. What drove her to do this, right? So really understand without judgment what drove her. She also have a background in very deep spiritual practices for years. So it's not like out of the blue she decided to add this. I would probably not have dared to go there before, but again, how can we go there? And as I mentioned, also bring people from other Japanese specific spiritual practices that might give us an inkling and in new insights in how to know how to practice and how to do repetition in a way that can bring new insight or practice. Part of it is I discovered that in Japan, when you have a main practice, you have a minor practice that can help you actually gain deeper insight. For example, if you do the one martial arts that I do with the sword, you will do either archery or calligraphy to gain a fresh point of view into your own practice. And it will be almost like when you go to university and you have a major and a minor. So that I'm going to break not often, but every so often. I will also, perhaps you've seen, probably noticed, I'm not saying a lot of mailings. I apologize, but I'm really trying to focus on the book, the first edition of the first 21 interviews from the podcast. So it's going to be scheduled to come out in the fall of 2024. I'm halfway through with the help of a wonderful fellow practitioner who's helping me copy edit. So that is going to be out in the fall. I'm financing it myself with some of your help, of the support of the Patreon community. So if you want to help with the book, please, support the podcast. That's the best way to help. That's where the money to edit the book is coming from. And the proceeds of the book is actually going to be used to probably finance the second edition of the book. With the next 21 interviews, they may become a second edition and so on, with the drawings and all of that. And then I think the goal for 2024, again, deepening my practice through the studies with my Shin Buddhist priest. I'm going to do another practice with my mentor, and also deepening my practice of martial arts. I'm going to do a very hard testing, which I already failed. And I think I'm facing the fear of failing it again. I have a 50% chance. My sensei is very honest and not flattering about my skills. So that is a fear I have to face. And part of it is mental training about letting go of the outcomes. That is another thing I'll be facing and perhaps sharing with you through the Patreon and some of the tips I'm trying to use to face that. Reiki is a big part of that in 2024. And as usual, please, any suggestion for the podcast, for the Patreon. This is a very, I want it to be more of a dialogue. So please reach out to me. A lot of you do through Instagram. That's probably the easiest way. If you could please keep it very short. I just got a beautiful communication from people, but some of them are 6-7 pages long. I do, and it may take me I'm going to answer them, but it may take me a bit longer. So if you can keep it concise, I want to answer all of you. I really appreciate you taking the time to write to me. I appreciate your time. I know we're all busy. So if you can just keep me some pointers and then we can expand. I want to answer all of you. I really always appreciate you taking the time to listen to the podcast, to practice with me. You have no idea how much this means to me. You guys are a big part of my growth as a practitioner, and I could not be here at this point of my practice without any of you. And you bring a lot of joy to my life. So I wish you a 2024, hopefully a little bit less, less up and down a roller coaster than 2023 for all of us as a world, but with a beautiful richness like we had in 2023, hopefully, and perhaps a little bit more joy for all of us, and that we smile a lot, and that we get a lot of beautiful insights, and that we practice together, and that perhaps we also have a lot more in person together where we are in our respective cities. And also, I think I've been losing a lot of people in my family lately, not very close. A lot of people I love have been losing their pets. Please tell the people you love them, the people who are meaningful. Just be present when the people that you live with. Sometimes we do have to escape on our phones and watch TV, but let's be present in 2024. I think that is part also of my goals for 24. And that's perhaps also going to really be on my Patreon, the podcast. I'm not going to be teaching a lot of classes. So if you wonder when me, will be mostly mentoring through the Patreon, because I want to be present in person a lot. But if you're in New York City, there will be in-person practice, and it will be one of the few in 2024, the 14th, I believe, and it's a Sunday. So we're going to be joining practitioners, and you can be from my lineage or not. We're going to be sharing Reiki hands-on to celebrate the new year. So reach out to me. Again, Dive Into Reiki on Insta, YouTube, or my website where you can find my email. I love you all. Thank you for supporting the podcast by listening, rating it, or being on the Patreon. Wishing you a wonderful 2024. Besos. Ciao.